Emma Bennett did not leave her husband because he stopped loving her. She left because another man made her feel visible. And she mistook visibility for value. For 6 years, Daniel Hayes loved her in ways that never demanded attention. Every winter morning, he warmed her car before she left for work. Every stressful night, he placed tea beside her laptop without interrupting her thoughts. When she fell asleep on the couch, he lowered the television volume and covered her legs with the blanket she liked most. Quiet love. Invisible love. The kind people stop noticing right before they destroy it. Then Adrian Cole entered her life. Perfect smile. Perfect watch. Perfect timing. A man who knew how to make a woman feel admired in public. Emma still remembered the first time Adrian looked at her across a rooftop event downtown. Chicago lights reflected behind him like something out of a movie. Music floated through the cold air, and Adrian smiled at her like she was the only woman in the room. That night, Daniel waited outside in the rain, holding her coat because she had forgotten it in the car. Emma barely noticed. Weeks later, at a charity dinner, beneath crystal chandeliers and soft piano music, Emma removed her wedding ring in front of everyone. Daniel looked at the ring, then had a trembling hand. For a second, his fingers tightened around the wine glass. Hoosed slightly, the only sign that she had heard him. "You're really choosing him?" he asked quietly. Emma swallowed. "He makes me feel alive." Daniel stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just wounded in a way that looked permanent. "You're going to miss me," he said softly. "Not today. But one day, when silence stops feeling empty." Emma forced herself not to cry. "You were never enough for the life I wanted." The words landed like glass, breaking underwater. Daniel looked down briefly, then stood. Outside, rain reflected Gold City lights across the pavement. He walked into it alone. And Emma watched him disappear beside another man. Without knowing, she had just abandoned the only person who had ever truly protected her. By the time she discovered who Daniel Hayes really was, he had already learned how to live without her. 6 years earlier. Emma Bennett met Daniel Hayes outside St. Mary's Hospital during the worst storm Chicago had seen that winter. Rain hammered against the pavement hard enough to blur the city lights into trembling gold reflections. Emma sat beneath a broken umbrella near the emergency entrance, trying desperately not to cry where strangers could see her. Her mascara had smeared beneath exhausted eyes. Her phone battery was dead. Her mother had just been rushed into surgery after collapsing at dinner. Cars passed through the flooded street beside her while cold wind soaked the sleeves of her coat. People walked around her. Nobody stopped. Until Daniel did. He noticed her from across the parking lot while locking the door of his car. Not because she was beautiful. Because she looked like someone trying very hard not to fall apart. For a moment, he simply watched her quietly. Emma kept wiping tears away before they could fully fall. Like even her sadness embarrassed her. Then Daniel walked toward her through the rain. Slowly. Carefully. As if he didn't want to scare her. Without saying anything, he removed his coat and held it above her head to shield her from the storm. "You don't have to pretend you're okay," he sighed softly. Something inside Emma cracked immediately. Not because he flirted, not because he sounded charming, because he noticed the exact thing she was trying to hide. Most men looked at her face. Daniel looked at her pain. She stared at him in silence while rainwater slid down the side of his neck and disappeared beneath the collar of his black sweater. "You're getting soaked," she whispered. Daniel gave a small shrug. "You looked colder." That was the first moment Emma ever felt emotionally safe beside another human being. Inside the hospital waiting room, Daniel sat beside her for almost 3 hours. He never overwhelmed her with questions, never tried forcing conversation. He simply stayed. At one point, Emma glanced toward the vending machine 3 separate times without standing. 10 minutes later, Daniel returned holding a caramel latte with extra foam. Exactly how she liked it. Emma blinked in surprise. "How did you know?" "You smiled at the picture on the machine when you looked at this one." She laughed softly for the first time all night, and Daniel looked relieved hearing it. When her father finally arrived after midnight, Daniel quietly stepped away before anyone could thank him. No number. No attempt to impress her. No performance. The next morning, Emma woke in the waiting room chair beneath dim hospital lights and found another coffee resting beside her. Still warm. No note attached. Just care. That was Daniel. Quiet. Observant. Terrifyingly precise with love. Months later, after they started dating, Emma began noticing things about him that felt almost impossible. Daniel remembered everything. The way she rubbed her wrist when anxious. The songs she played during stressful nights. The exact tone her voice changed to before panic attacks. One snowy evening, Emma froze inside a crowded elevator after it suddenly stopped between floors. The lights flickered once. People groaned impatiently around them. Emma's breathing immediately became uneven. Daniel stepped in front of her without hesitation, blocking the noise, blocking the crowd. His hand slowly reached for hers. Warm. Steady. Look at me, he whispered. Emma did. Count with me. His thumb brushed softly against her trembling fingers. For in. She inhaled shakily. For out. The elevator disappeared. The fear disappeared. There was only his voice. Only E. Only E.M. Later that night, snow fell quietly beyond their apartment windows while Emma rested against his chest beneath dim kitchen light. How do you always know what I need? She asked sleepily. Daniel smiled faintly before brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I pay attention to what hurts you. Emma kissed him then. Softly. Slowly. Like she already belonged to him. And softly, say, Deeth. Emma Bennett grew up inside a world where appearances mattered more than peace. Success mattered. Status mattered. Perception mattered most of all. Her father, Richard Bennett, built luxury developments across Chicago, while secretly drowning beneath financial pressure he refused to admit publicly. At family dinners, everyone performed happiness beautifully. Crystal glasses. Perfect. Lighting, carefully rehearsed, smiles. Even anxiety wore expensive clothes in the Bennett family. Daniel never belonged naturally in rooms like that. He was too quiet, too emotionally grounded to compete for attention. Emma's older sister Claire noticed it constantly. He's kind, Claire admitted one evening while swirling wine inside her glass. But kindness is an ambition. Emma defended Daniel immediately. He works harder than anyone I know. Claire gave a sympathetic smile. That's not the same thing as becoming someone important. Daniel heard the comment from across the dining room. He never reacted, never argued, never tried proving himself. Instead, he simply walked behind Emma's chair a few minutes later and rested his hand lightly against the back of her neck. A tiny gesture. Barely visible, but Emma immediately relaxed beneath his touch. That was Daniel's way. He calmed storms, quietly. But over time, Claire's words began growing inside Emma like poison disguised as concern, because Daniel never talked about power, never mentioned influence, never explained why wealthy men called him late at night, speaking in lowered voices. Sometimes Emma woke at 2 a.m. and found him standing alone near the apartment windows overlooking the city, phone pressed to his ear. Jaw tense, voice calm. The moment he noticed her awake, he always ended the call gently, then crossed the room and kissed her forehead like nothing heavy had ever touched him. Whenever Emma asked questions, Daniel only smiled faintly. It's nothing you need to carry. At first, it felt protective, safe, romantic, even. But eventually, it started feeling like distance, like he existed inside rooms she would never fully enter. Then Adrian Cole appeared. And unlike Daniel, Adrian loved attention. The first time Emma met him was during a luxury art showcase downtown. Music echoed softly through the gallery, while photographers moved between wealthy guests holding champagne glasses beneath gold lighting. Emma stood quietly near one of her interior design installations. When Adrian approached her, not subtly, confidently, like he already knew she would remember him. "This is yours," he asked, studying her work carefully. Emma nodded. Adrian smiled slowly. "It's the first thing in this room that feels alive." The compliment hit differently because people nearby overheard it. For the first time in months, Emma felt seen publicly, and Adrian understood exactly how addictive that feeling could become. At future events, he introduced her loudly, proudly. This woman is going to become one of the biggest designers in Chicago. People turned toward her immediately, asked questions, wanted her attention, wanted her presence, and Emma slowly began confusing visibility with love. One freezing night after a rooftop event overlooking the river, Adrian removed his expensive coat and wrapped it around her shoulders while city lights shimmered across the dark water below. "You know what your problem is?" he asked softly. Emma smiled slightly. "What?" "You've spent years beside a man who hides you." The words landed harder than she wanted them to, because some hidden part of her feared they were true. Later that evening, Daniel picked her up outside the hotel. The moment Emma entered the car, he noticed her shaking from the cold. Without interrupting the silence, he adjusted the heater toward her side and lowered the seat warmer beneath her legs. No speech. No jealousy. No questions. Just care. Emma stared out the passenger window while reflections from passing streetlights moved across Daniel's face. Then he glanced quietly toward her lap. Adrian's business card still rested between her fingers. Daniel noticed immediately. His jaw tightened once. Very slightly, then relaxed again. He said nothing. And somehow, that silence hurt Emma more than anger would have, because part of her suddenly wanted him to fight for her. To claim her loudly. To become bigger. Sharper. Harder to ignore. But Daniel only loved her the same devastatingly quiet way he always had. And slowly, Emma began mistaking emotional safety for emotional smallness. The charity dinner looked beautiful from the outside. Crystal chandeliers reflected soft golden light across the ballroom. Champagne glasses clinked gently beneath slow piano music, while wealthy guests laughed beside enormous windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Everything felt elegant, expensive, perfectly controlled. Emma descended the staircase wearing the silver dress Daniel had bought years earlier after a first successful design contract. Daniel remembered that night perfectly. She had cried in his arms after signing the deal. He had taken her dancing in their kitchen afterward while snow fell outside their apartment windows. Emma no longer remembered any of that. But Daniel did. He always remembered. At the bottom of the staircase, Adrian greeted her with a kiss against her cheek. Too familiar. Too confident. Several people nearby noticed immediately. Emma felt Italiano. The attention. The admiration. The validation. Daniel noticed too. For a brief second, something painful crossed his face. But instead of reacting, he quietly stepped aside to help an elderly woman struggling with her chair near the dining tables. He adjusted the seat gently, offered her water, smiled politely while everyone else ignored her. Emma watched him from across the ballroom. Even now, even while losing her, Daniel was still taking care of strangers. That should have made her love him more. Instead, it made guilt spread slowly through her chest. And guilt becomes dangerous when someone no longer wants to confront the person hurting them most. Themselves. Later that night, Adrian found Emma alone near the balcony overlooking the city skyline. Cold wind moved softly through her hair, while distant traffic lights shimmered below like rivers of gold. Inside the ballroom, Daniel stood near the back wall with his hands in his pockets, watching her quietly. Not angrily, not desperately, just sadly. And somehow, his sadness made Emma feel more trapped than anger ever could. "You don't belong in small rooms," Adrian whispered beside her. Emma swallowed hard. "You could have a bigger life." She looked toward Daniel again, toward the man who had spent years loving her carefully, quietly, faithfully. And suddenly, she hated him for making love feel so emotionally safe, because safety no longer felt exciting beside the version of herself. Adrian awakened. Emma closed her eyes briefly, then walked back inside. Toward Daniel, toward the moment that would destroy both of them. Music echoed softly around them as guests continued laughing nearby, completely unaware that a marriage was dying only a few feet away. Emma's fingers trembled while removing her wedding ring. Not because she was certain, because some hidden part of her still wanted Daniel to stop her, fight for her, claim her loudly, become impossible to leave. Daniel stared silently at the ring resting in her palm, then slowly lifted his eyes toward hers. "Is this really what you want?" Emma's throat tightened, painfully. I want more. More than us. Tears burned behind her eyes, but pride answered before love could survive long enough to speak. I want someone who knows how to take up space. Daniel inhaled slowly. For the first time all night, real pain crossed his face, openly. Raw. Human. Devastating. I spent 6 years making space for you. Emma immediately looked away because she could not survive watching herself destroy him in real time. You were never enough. The words landed softly, but they shattered something permanent. Daniel nodded once. Betty, gently, like hope itself, had finally become too heavy to carry. Then he stepped back. No screaming. No begging. No public humiliation. Just a man quietly walking into cold rain while the woman he loved chose admiration over peace. And for the first time in her life, Emma felt loneliness standing beside another person. The penthouse Adrian rented overlooked the entire city. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected thousands of gold lights across the dark Chicago skyline while soft jazz played somewhere in the background. Everything looked expensive, elegant, impressive, but none of it felt warm. Emma stood barefoot beside the glass, holding a wine glass she never drank from. Behind her, Adrian sat on the couch answering emails without even looking up. His attention moved constantly between screens, investors, and messages, never fully toward her. And for the first time since leaving Daniel, Emma felt emotionally invisible beside someone who knew how to command attention from everyone else. Her phone remained silent all night. No calls from Daniel. No messages. No desperate attempt to get her back. At first, she felt angry, then strangely wounded by his silence, because some hidden part of her had expected him to fight harder. The next morning, Emma found a small travel bag resting beside the apartment entrance. Inside it, her migraine medication, her favorite sweater, her silk sleep mask, and the charger she always forgot during emotional moments. Daniel had packed it for her. Even after she shattered him, Emma slowly sat on the cold marble bathroom floor, holding the sweater against her chest. It still smelled faintly like his cologne. Clean, warm, familiar. And suddenly, Adrian's penthouse no longer felt luxurious. It felt temporary. That afternoon, Emma returned home to collect more belongings. Daniel stood alone in the living room, carefully removing framed photographs from the wall. Not angrily, almost gently, as if even broken memories deserved respect. You're already taking them down? Emma asked quietly. Daniel didn't answer immediately. You made your choice publicly. A sighed softly. I'm surviving it privately. The sentence hurt more than shouting ever could. Emma watched his hands closely. For the first time, she noticed they were trembling slightly, but he still handled every frame carefully so the glass wouldn't crack. That destroyed her more than rage would have. For one dangerous second, she almost told him she had made a mistake. Then her phone lit up. Adrian, dinner tonight. We're black. Emma stared at the message in silence and hated herself for noticing how emotionally empty it felt compared to Daniel's quiet care. Daniel walked past her, carrying a cardboard box. Their shoulders almost touched. Neither moved away immediately. That tiny hesitation carried more intimacy than everything Adrian had offered her so far. Then Daniel kept walking, and Emma realized something terrifying. He was already learning how to live without her. Weeks passed. Emma tried becoming the version of herself Adrian seemed to admire most. She attended luxury dinners beneath golden hotel lights, wore expensive black dresses, smiled beside investors during rooftop parties overlooking the river. And every time Adrian introduced her as the most talented woman in Chicago, people turned toward her immediately, wanted her attention, wanted her presence, wanted her beauty. It should have felt exciting. Instead, it slowly began feeling exhausting, because Adrian admired her loudly, without ever truly seeing her. He never noticed when anxiety made her fingers shake beneath the dinner table, never noticed when crowds overwhelmed her, never remembered she hated elevators after getting trapped inside one as a child. Daniel had remembered. Daniel always took the stairs with her, even 20 floors, pretending he needed the exercise one freezing night during a rooftop event. The elevator suddenly stopped between floors. Only for 13 seconds, but Emma's chest tightened immediately. Her breathing became uneven. Lights flickered once overhead. Adrian barely looked up from his phone. "Probably nothing," he muttered, while replying to an investor message. Emma closed her eyes, and suddenly she heard Daniel's voice inside her memory. "Look at me. Soft.com. Safe. For in. For out." Emma pressed trembling fingers against the elevator wall, trying to steady herself. But Daniel wasn't there anymore. And somehow, that absence hurt more than the panic itself. Across the city, Daniel was rebuilding his life with painful discipline. He moved into a modest apartment above an old bookstore where rain tapped softly against the windows at night. He returned to work before sunrise, answered fewer calls, spoke less. He stopped wearing his wedding ring, but still kept it hidden inside a drawer he never opened. One evening, his friend Marcus found him sitting alone beside the apartment window, staring at the city lights below. "You can still fight for her," Marcus said quietly. Daniel didn't look away from the glass. "I fought for her for 6 years," he answered softly. "She thought it was silence." Marcus sighed heavily. "She still doesn't know everything he did for her." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "She wasn't supposed to." Then after a long silence, he added, "Love shouldn't have to present receipts." But Emma kept finding them everywhere. Not paper receipts, emotional ones. The bakery owner who smiled sadly and asked where Daniel was, because he always ordered your birthday cake 3 weeks early. The mechanic who casually mentioned Daniel had already paid for her winter tires months ago. The hotel pianist who recognized her and said, "Your husband used to request your favorite song every anniversary." And finally, the hospital nurse. "Your husband stayed every night after your mother's surgery," she told Emma gently. Emma froze. "My father said he stayed." The nurse shook her head. "No, sweetheart. Your father left after an hour. Daniel stayed all 3 nights." Emma felt her chest collapse inward. That night, she called Daniel. "No answer."
She stared at their old message thread for almost 10 minutes before finally typing, "I didn't know about my mom." 3 dots appeared, then vanished, then appeared again. Finally, Daniel replied, "You were scared. Someone had to stay." No blame, no manipulation, no anger, just love, still surviving quietly beneath heartbreak. And somehow, that hurt Emma more than hatred ever could. Emma saw Daniel again at a winter fundraiser hosted inside one of Chicago's historic hotels. Soft piano music drifted beneath golden lights, while snow fell quietly outside the enormous ballroom windows. At first, she almost didn't recognize him, not because he looked richer, not because he looked colder, because he looked emotionally farther away. Daniel stood near the back of the room, speaking calmly with an older man in a wheelchair, while a young waitress smiled nervously beside them. And somehow, people naturally gravitated toward him, not because he demanded attention, because peace has a gravity of its own. Emma noticed women glancing toward him throughout the evening. A brunette near the champagne table smiled at him twice. Another woman touched his arm while laughing softly at something he said. Daniel remained polite, warm, distant, like a door that had once been open and was now quietly locked. Adrian noticed Emma staring. "Your ex cleans up well," he muttered lightly while sipping whiskey. Emma didn't answer, because for the first time, Daniel no longer looked like someone waiting for her. Then Daniel turned and saw her across the ballroom, and for one fragile second, time softened between them. There was still something there, a wound, a memory, a version of home neither of them fully knew how to forget. Emma slowly walked toward him. Her heartbeat felt painfully loud beneath the music. "Daniel." He nodded politely. "Emma." Not sweetheart, not Em, just Emma. And somehow, hearing her own name from him hurt more than anger would have. "You look well," she whispered. Daniel gave a faint smile. "I'm learning how to be." Her eyes immediately filled with tears. "I miss how you used to say my name." Daniel looked down briefly. For one dangerous second, the old tenderness almost returned to his face. Then he quietly looked away. "You made that name painful for me." Emma swallowed hard. "I was wrong." Daniel stayed silent. So she forced herself to continue. I thought you were hiding from life. I thought you were small. Her voice trembled. I thought Adrian was everything you weren't. Daniel finally looked at her again. And now, Emma's chest tightened painfully. Now I think I didn't know the difference between being impressed and being loved. The words landed heavily between them. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. That was the closest he had come to breaking. Emma stepped closer carefully. I know I don't deserve another chance, she whispered. But can we talk? Just once. No pride. No Adrian. No excuses. Daniel studied her quietly for several long seconds while snow continued falling beyond the ballroom windows. Then finally, one conversation. Hope opened inside Emma's chest immediately. Small, dangerous, alive. 2 nights later, they met at the tiny diner where they had eaten after signing their marriage papers years earlier. Emma arrived early. Daniel arrived exactly on time. For nearly an hour, they spoke like two people standing beside the ruins of something once beautiful. Emma apologized honestly. Not perfectly, but truthfully. And when she admitted she had wanted him to become louder because she had been too insecure to trust quiet love, Daniel looked genuinely wounded. Emma slowly reached across the table. Her fingers touched his. He didn't pull away immediately. For 3 fragile seconds, she felt him again. The man who had stayed. The man who had always loved her carefully. Then Daniel's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. And suddenly his entire expression changed. Marcus. Emergency. Daniel stood immediately. I have to go. Emma rose too, panic flickering across her face. Daniel, is everything okay? He hesitated, then looked directly at her. It's your father. Richard Bennett's company was collapsing. Not financially. Legally. A federal investigation had uncovered falsified development records, illegal transfers, and investor fraud connected to multiple luxury developments across Chicago. Emma arrived at her father's office just before midnight and immediately felt something was wrong. The entire executive floor looked tense. Assistants whispered nervously near the elevators. Attorneys moved quickly between glass offices carrying folders thick with documents. Inside the conference room, Richard Bennett sat pale and sweating beneath cold fluorescent lights while several lawyers argued around him. And Adrian was there too, but he wasn't helping. He was panicking. You told me this was contained. Adrian snapped angrily. Richard looked shattered. It was contained, he whispered. Because Daniel handled it before. Emma froze instantly. Daniel? Her father slowly looked toward her with exhausted shame in his eyes. You don't understand. Emma's chest tightened painfully. No, she whispered. I really don't. Adrian immediately stepped forward. This has nothing to do with him. But Richard's silence said everything. Then the conference room doors opened, and Daniel entered, not as the abandoned husband, not as a quiet man everyone underestimated. Something about him felt completely different now. Controlled, respected, dangerously calm. 2 attorneys walked beside him along with a federal compliance officer carrying sealed documents. The entire room shifted the moment Daniel stepped inside. Even the lawyers stopped talking. Emma stared at him speechlessly. Daniel wasn't confused, wasn't intimidated, wasn't small. For the first time in her life, Emma realized Daniel had never been small at all. He simply never needed attention to feel powerful. One of the attorneys immediately approached him. Mr. Hayes, the board approved your recommendation. Emma's breath caught painfully. Mr. Hayes, not Daniel, not the quiet husband she abandoned in the rain. Mr. Hayes. Adrian's expression darkened instantly. You shouldn't even be here. Daniel slowly looked toward him. I'm the reason you were ever allowed in this room. Silence swallowed the conference room immediately. Emma turned sharply toward Adrian. What does that mean? Adrian said nothing. Daniel calmly placed a folder on the table. 3 years ago, your father's company faced criminal exposure after Adrian's firm manipulated valuation reports tied to the Lakeshore development. Emma's face lost color. No, Daniel continued quietly. Your father didn't know at first. When he discovered it, he panicked. I privately restructured the liabilities, protected the employees, compensated affected investors, and kept your family out of public disgrace. Richard finally broke down completely. He saved us, Emma. Emma looked at Daniel like she no longer recognized reality itself. You did all of that? Daniel's expression never changed. I didn't do it for your father. And instantly, Emma understood. He had done it for her, to protect her family, her mother, her future, her name, everything. Adrian laughed bitterly from across the room. Very noble, but don't let him fool you. He has money, power, influence. He just enjoyed pretending to be humble. Daniel finally looked at him with visible disgust. No, he said calmly. I refuse to use power to make my wife feel small. That sentence destroyed Emma completely. Every memory suddenly felt different. Every quiet gesture, every silent sacrifice, every moment she mistook peace for weakness. Daniel had been carrying storms she never even saw, and she abandoned him for one of them. Daniel turned toward Richard one final time. I'll still protect the employees and investors, but I won't protect men who lied after being shown mercy. Adrian's face immediately lost color. You can't do that. Daniel looked directly into his eyes. I already did. Then he turned and walked out. Emma rushed after him into the hallway. Daniel, please. He stopped walking. She was crying openly now, not elegantly, not beautifully. Honestly, I didn't know. Daniel finally looked at her, and for the first time, real pain entered his voice. You didn't want to know. Emma stepped backward like the truth physically hurt. Daniel moved closer slowly. I gave you peace, he whispered. You wanted performance. I gave you protection. You called it weakness. Tears streamed down Emma's face. I was wrong. I know. Then please don't leave like this. Daniel looked at her with heartbreaking tenderness, the kind that hurts precisely because it no longer belongs to you. I already left, he said softly. You're only just feeling it. Then he walked away. And this time, Emma finally understood the truth. She had not lost him that night. She lost him the moment she stopped recognizing the value of being loved quietly. The scandal spread across Chicago within 48 hours. News outlets flooded television screens with headlines about fraud investigations, frozen accounts, and federal inquiries tied to luxury development projects. And Adrian Cole's company collapsed first. Investors disappeared overnight. Partners denied knowing him. The same people who once crowded around him at rooftop parties suddenly stopped answering his calls. But Daniel never celebrated publicly, never gave interviews, never humiliated Adrian online, never tried making himself look powerful. He simply released the documents required by law and allowed truth to destroy what ego had built. Richard Bennett resigned quietly from his company 2 weeks later, and Emma slowly realized something terrifying. Her family name had survived only because Daniel protected it long before anyone even knew danger existed. That was when Emma finally learned the full truth about the man she abandoned. Daniel Hayes wasn't just a consultant. He was a founder of Hayes Strategic Recovery, a private crisis firm known for quietly saving collapsing corporations before scandals ever reached public. He had rebuilt companies, protected employees, recovered pensions, exposed corruption, saved families from financial ruin, and somehow almost nobody knew his name because Daniel hated what power did to insecure people. He never wanted admiration, only peace. And Emma had mistaken that restraint for weakness. 1 month later, unable to carry the weight of regret anymore, Emma walked into the small bookstore beneath Daniel's apartment. Soft jazz played quietly near the shelves while snow drifted beyond the front windows. And there he was, sitting near the back beside a little girl, listening carefully as he read aloud from a children's book. The girl laughed brightly. Daniel smiled softly, warmly, naturally, and Emma suddenly felt the full devastation of what she had lost. Not status, not luxury, not protection. A man whose love made ordinary life feel emotionally safe. Daniel looked up slowly when he noticed her standing there. The little girl ran back toward her mother. Emma approached carefully. I'm not here to ask you to come back, she whispered. Daniel studied her silently. I'm here because I finally understand something. He waited. Emma fought back tears. You were never small. I made you small because I was too immature to recognize quiet strength. Daniel lowered his eyes briefly. Emma's voice trembled harder. You loved me better than I loved myself. A painful silence filled the bookstore. And I punish you for not looking like the fantasy I thought I wanted. Daniel's expression softened slightly, but he still didn't move closer. That was the justice. Not revenge. Not cruelty. Distance. The quiet distance a good man creates after being broken too deeply by someone he once trusted completely. Emma slowly removed a thin necklace from beneath her sweater. Her wedding ring still hung from it. I kept this because I thought maybe one day. Her voice failed. Then she gently placed the ring on the table between them. But this doesn't belong to Hope anymore. Daniel looked silently at the ring, then back at her. I hope one day you become someone who doesn't need to lose love to recognize it. Emma's tears finally fell openly. Do you hate me? Daniel answered immediately. No. That somehow hurt even more. Do you still love me? Daniel stayed quiet for a very long time, then finally whispered, I love the woman I thought we were becoming. Emma closed her eyes painfully. And me? Daniel looked at her with heartbreaking honesty. I'm learning how not to wait for you. And Emma finally understood the real punishment. Not anger, not revenge, not humiliation. The unbearable silence of no longer being waited for. 6 months later, Emma Bennett rebuilt her life quietly, without Adrian, without the illusion of status, without the man who had once made love feel effortless. Her apartment was smaller now, simpler. The silence inside it no longer felt luxurious. It felt honest. For the first time in years, Emma stopped designing spaces meant to impress wealthy clients and started creating places that made people feel emotionally safe. Warm lighting, soft colors, comfort before appearance, peace before perfection. The first major project she accepted after everything collapsed was a women's shelter for mothers rebuilding their lives after financial abuse and emotional abandonment. No cameras attended the opening. No champagne. No magazine coverage. Just tired women slowly stepping into rooms that finally felt safe enough to breathe inside. And somehow, that mattered more to Emma than every rooftop event Adrian had ever taken her to. One rainy evening in November, Emma received a simple invitation in the mail. Hayes Foundation, private charity opening. No media, no sponsors, no public spectacle. Very Daniel. She stared at the invitation for nearly 10 minutes before finally deciding to go. The event took place inside an old restored library downtown. Soft piano music drifted quietly beneath warm golden lighting, while rain tapped gently against enormous windows overlooking the city. Emma stood near the back of the room the moment she arrived, and then she saw him, Daniel, wearing a dark charcoal suit, one hand resting inside his pocket, while he spoke calmly with a small group near the stage. Still quiet, still composed, still Daniel. But now, people listened differently, not because he demanded attention, because everyone in the room understood his weight. The room respected him before he even spoke. And Emma suddenly realized something painful. Daniel had never become more valuable. The world had simply finally caught up to what she failed to recognize in time. As he explained the Foundation's mission, legal and financial protection for families destroyed by corporate corruption, Emma watched several people listening with visible admiration. Not shallow admiration, not fascination with power, trust, and somehow that hurt even more. Because she remembered the version of him who once stood barefoot in their kitchen, making coffee for her before sunrise. The version no one saw except her, and she lost him anyway. After the event ended, guests slowly disappeared into the rain outside. Emma remained near the staircase, holding her coat tightly against her chest. Then Daniel saw her. For a second, neither moved. The years between them suddenly felt painfully small. Daniel walked toward her quietly. Hi, Emma. Her chest tightened immediately at the softness in his voice. Hi. Outside, rain covered the streets in blurred reflections of Gold City lights. Daniel opened an umbrella as they stepped onto the sidewalk together. For several seconds, neither spoke, only the sound of rain between them. Then Emma smiled sadly. You still hate umbrellas? Daniel looked upward slightly as rain tapped softly against the black fabric above them. I never hated umbrellas. Emma laughed quietly through tears. You just like making me think I was protected by accident. A small smile appeared at the corner of Daniel's mouth. Real, gentle, dangerously familiar. For one brief second, the past returned so strongly Emma almost reached for his hand. Almost, but she stopped herself, because love had finally taught her something painful. Real love is not proven by how much you can receive from someone. Sometimes it is proven by knowing when you no longer deserve to ask for more. Daniel walked her toward the curb where his car waited beneath falling rain. As he opened the driver's side door, he paused, then looked back at her. Emma. She lifted her eyes toward him immediately. I'm glad you came tonight. Her throat tightened painfully. Me too. And for a moment, neither moved. Rain falling softly around them. Old love lingering silently between them. Not gone, but no longer belonging to the future. Then Daniel entered the car. And this time, Emma didn't chase him. She simply stood there watching the headlights disappear into the wet Chicago streets, while tears rolled quietly down her face. Not because he had won, not because she had lost, but because she finally understood the full weight of what she destroyed. Daniel had spent years loving her, without making her beg for safety, and she traded that love for admiration that disappeared the moment power did. Years later, Emma would tell people the greatest mistake of her life was never choosing another man. It was failing to recognize the one who had already chosen her every single day. And Daniel, eventually, he found love again, not with someone dazzled by his success, not with someone impressed by his influence, but with someone gentle enough to notice who he had always been beneath all of it. Because the rarest kind of man is not the one who can give you the world. It is the one who makes the world feel softer whenever you are beside him. And Emma learned that truth too late. She chose another man, without understanding the value of the one quietly loving her all along. And by the time she finally saw Daniel clearly, he had already become someone she no longer had the right to hold.